My soul, my poor soul, my soul, my soul.
This is John Kane with Johnny Rice's Let's Talk. I want to thank you for joining us. Well, we're gonna try to do the show mostly relying on you this week. So I got a couple of things I want to talk about. A news item that I'm sure you're not familiar with, and but it's something that I've been talking about. I've been talking about the battle the Senecas have been going through with New York State over the state trying to force them into sharing their gaming revenue. And this revenue sharing was based on, and it can only be based on, a state giving a concession in exchange for revenue sharing. That's the law. That's the underlying federal statute. It's illegal for a state to tax or impose a fee or charge Native people for doing gaming. That's illegal. So if there is a revenue sharing provision, it has to meet a bit of a test. And that test is that whatever the state concedes for that revenue sharing has to be both substantial and quantifiable. And by substantial, it means that if the Senecas are going to pay for it, it has to do something that helps their business. It can't just be a wash. It can't say, okay, we're going to give you $1 billion and you're going to give us $1 billion of something back. It's got to be more than that. It's got to be more than just a wash. But again, so what the state said they were giving to the Senecas was an exclusivity, a right to have exclusive gaming in Western New York, 15 counties of Western New York from Rochester west. Now, the problem with that is that the state couldn't do gaming. And this was started in 2002. In 2002, right up until 2016, there were Class 3 gaming, which is, again, Vegas-style casinos, were illegal in New York State. They changed the law in 2016, or a little before that. But so it was illegal for anybody in the state to do Class 3 gaming. So if the state says, well, we're going to provide you an exclusivity, wait a minute, you didn't give anything up. Nobody could do gaming anyway. And to the extent that gaming is allowed in New York State, which is like horse tracks and lotteries, and it turns out these Class 2 gaming machines, which are a lot like Class 3.
That was the change in 2016 from.
Well, I want to say it was actually closer to 2013. I think the state put a referendum that allowed the state to do Class 3 gaming, but it would take 3 years before the first one. The first one opened up. The first Vegas-style casino in New York State didn't open up until after 2016.
Where's that?
Well, there's one in Schenectady. There's one in on this side of Rochester. There's also one in.
Wait, that's non-native owned. You're talking.
That's non-native owned, and there's one in the Catskills. It's called World Resorts Casino.
I didn't.
Yeah, there's three of them. There's three of them that are opening that are already open now, and of course the state has what they call Class 2 casinos all over the state. They got them down here. They've got it. What, in Yonkers? I think they have one. They've got one. A couple in Long Island.
What was
in Queens. Yeah.
Who pushed that legislation through and why?
New York State pushed it through because they wanted the native people built a gaming industry, and the state said, no, we want more of that.
But there had to be a moral shift, right?
Well, I would say native gaming probably provided that moral shift. People became more accepting of gaming because they never could have passed it through. But I don't want to get too far in the weeds here. But anyway, so to the extent that the state could do gaming during that 14-year period of the initial part of this compact, the state did do gaming. Like I said, they turned almost all of their racetracks, their horse tracks, which were all dying. They were all failing miserably, and in fact, because they are such cruel enterprises in the first place, and they became pretty sleazy, gambling joints for the most part. So they cleaned them all up, put a bunch of neon lights, and threw a bunch of slot machines in them, and they said now they're race. They actually called them racinos, but they even did a few of those within the so-called exclusivity zone of the Seneca Nation that the Senecas were paying for. Now, how much did they pay? In the 14 years that was contracted in the compact, they paid $1.4 billion. $1.4 billion to the state, and essentially still competed against the state every step along the way. Now, in the gaming compact, it laid it out clear that they were going to pay the percentages that they were going to pay and what years they were going to pay that percentage. They were going to pay 18% for years 1 through 4 of their gaming, starting in 2002, of their net slot drop of the slot machines, and that's really more like 48% of the actual revenue, but the net slot drop. In years 5 through 7, that would go to 22%, and then years 8 through 14, it would be 25% of the net slot drop the Senecas would pay for their slot machines in their casinos for this so-called exclusivity. There's no mention of any payments past 14 years. So when the compact was set for what's termed an automatic renewal in 2016, the renewal would come into effect if neither side had didn't have anything to negotiate, anything to change in the compact. Well, the Senecas didn't want to change anything. They knew the thing expired in 14 years. They had no more payments to be made, so they didn't ask for any changes. And the state knew that the language was in there, but they didn't want to kick it up because they didn't want to cause even have a discussion about it. So when the Senecas stopped paying and said, we're done, we fulfilled our obligation, the state took the Senecas to arbitration. The arbitration panel, which was one native guy, a guy by the name of Kevin Washburn, who is he used to head up the Interior Department. He's Chickasaw. He was one of the arbitrators. The other one was a New York lawyer named Henry Gutman, and the two of them agreed upon a third arbitrator, who was William Bassler here from New York as well. So you got two white New Yorkers who are on this arbitration panel and one native guy. Well, guess how they ruled? The two white guys ruled in favor of the state and said, no, you got to keep paying for another 7 years, even though there's no language that says it. They said, we're going to use the legal principle of past practices because you paid for 14 years. We're going to say, but we're just going to make you pay for another 7 years. And so they ruled that back in January. Well, the number came up today or last night. Last night, again, the same two judges, the third judge, again, Washburn, he won't even participate in this. He said this is, it's ludicrous. This ruling was absolutely false. But so they're telling the Senate because they've got to pay $256 million for the revenue sharing that would have been due for 2017 and 2018, and then the first quarter of 2019 will be due in a couple of weeks, and that'll be another 30 or 40 million dollars. So for all intents and purposes, these two white guys on this arbitration panel told the Senecas that they have to pay almost $300 million in revenue sharing and continue to pay, which will be right around $900 million to $1 billion for through 2023. Now, the Senecas have not agreed to make this payment, and they may, and we all hope that they're going to fight it because under federal law, revenue sharing, as the state has it, is illegal because it's tantamount to a tax. It's like, no, you must pay us, and we're going to force you to pay us even through this arbitration. And and this what gets me back. And I know I'm going to have the caller who says you're going to do a Kill Whitey show again. Racism is the underlying issue here. The system is built by white people. The legal system is, and even the arbitration system is built by white people. Two of the three judges in this arbitration panel were white, and they ruled in favor of the state. And here's the thing. If, for whatever reason, they felt like there was, a clear line in the compact that was, or a line in the compact that was unclear, where the Senecas could interpret that the payments were fulfilled in 14 years, and the state could assume that the payments would continue. I mean, if you could clearly see, okay, there's some ambiguity in there. What a real arbitration or a real mediator would have done is they said, look, there was a period of time before the renewal where if both sides had a disagreement, they could have negotiated changes in the compact. They could have reset that and said, why don't you guys negotiate the better language between you so it's an agreement. Now, in all likelihood, the Senecas would have said, look, we just don't want a revenue sharing provision anymore. You can keep your exclusivity. It has no value to us. It never did. And just sever that part of the agreement. Now, what would the state do? Well, it's entirely possible the state would say, no, we're not going to renew the compact if you're not paying, which would be pretty vindictive, and it would be short of, it would be actually like extortion, especially when you consider the Seneca Nation and the Oneidas and the Mohawks created the gaming industry in New York. And now the state is all in with three of their own casinos.
So this arbitration is strictly through a federal or state?
No, it is. It's the American Arbitration Association. So it's not a court, but under the terms of the compact, an arbitration ruling cannot be appealed. Now, and here's where the Senecas have an out, because the arbitration ruling is just ruling about the compact. It's not ruling about the underlying federal statute, which is the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. And at this point, the Senecas do have recourse. They can say, look, the whole revenue sharing thing is illegal. And in fact, there was a case that was ruled just last week in New Mexico, where New Mexico was trying to squeeze a bunch of native territories for gaming revenue in a revenue sharing deal. In fact, they have revenue sharing with all of the native gaming interests there. And they said, we not only want you to share the revenue, but you need to pay us a percentage of even the free plays and your promotional credits that you give. And so they were trying to cheat them for out of another $60 million or so. And a federal judge basically ruled against the state and said, no, you guys are taking this revenue sharing thing to a level that is outside of what the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act was all about.
So why is it arbitration and not? It's arbitration because it's a contract?
No, it's because that was the provision in the compact that's how they would resolve disputes. But see, it should have been disputes. It was still a stretch to use the arbitration system to solve this, because the Senecas didn't want to go into.
Right.
Obviously, the state didn't want to go into Seneca courts, and the Senecas didn't want to go into state courts.
Right.
And so they were supposed to mutually agree on something that was supposed to be more amenable to fairness, but it's
still
anything
not.
but. It's still not. It's still
Obviously.
Not. So I just want to throw that out there. We still so there is still a major conflict, and again, I have to remind people, because it's real easy on WBAI to point out what the right does wrong, but it's much harder to pinpoint how much racism exists on the left and with Democrats. And we got a mayor in Niagara Falls who compared the first responders of 9/11 to the cavalry that massacred Native peoples. I mean, that's how racist this Democratic Party mayor in Niagara Falls is. We've got the governor of the state of New York who literally said on record, on tape, on film, on camera, that the Senecas have a history of breaking agreements, which is almost the most absurd thing any white man could say about Native people. But
Yikes.
so I just want to throw that out there. But I also have to give I got to make a comment about last week's show. We had one caller who called in who starts off his call asking if I'm doing another Let's Kill Whitey show, and I gotta say.
Let me get this caffeine.
And I'm not. That doesn't even anger me. It actually makes me feel sorry for somebody, because if the mere suggestion that we talk about racism here makes a white person feel like their life is being threatened, that to talk about racism is tantamount to asking to kill white people, man, I'll tell you, your white privilege has not only fallen off the cliff into white fragility, that so bad that you are that fearful of the other, that we can't even talk about racism without feeling like your life is threatened. I mean, it's kind of amazing.
Well, originally I was going to say, one, why listen to the show then? Why sit through Indigenous people talking about how events relate to them? But he didn't listen to the show. He said, "Oh, I'm just calling in. I'm assuming, are you guys doing the kill whitey thing?" So the amount of privilege is just like, well, I'm not going to listen to your show, but I'm going to call in and see what.
Well, I believe he did listen, and I think he's called before. As you know,
no, he's listened before, but not that episode. And I was just like, what? Like, that's how much time you have to call in just to just to hear it, just to take up space.
Well, and of course, as I said last week, and I say almost every week, I'm still adjusting to this to our new format for being on for an hour. So I want to give a lot more time. In fact, we're going to go to calls almost next here, because I want to hear from you. We're a couple things going on next week. Our show will be a recorded show. Next week will be a recorded show, and. So we won't have calls. The following week, Shawnee will be doing a show because I'm gone for a couple of weeks. And so our traditional real banter with callers will kind of get suspended for a while. We're going to go into the spring fund drive in May. So I want to give some extra time today so we can hear from callers. And look, as I always say, you don't have to talk about the things that I brought up, and we don't have to always talk about racism, but it creeps in. I mean, it ends up being this pervasive thing that affects so much of what we what we experience on a daily basis. And again, racism shows itself in everything from economics to environmental to to social issues, all of it. So it's why I do talk about it, and it's why I try to shine a light on it. And I want to be clear, I'm not hating on white people. When I say one of the problems is that 70% of the U.S. population, adult population, is white, I'm not saying being white is a problem. I'm saying when you have that level of disproportionate power that was born out of white imperialism, white supremacy, and all of that, it's really hard to change. And there's a lot of white people who know that racism is bad, but are still somewhat hesitant to speak out about it. Maybe it's because it's their own family members that they got to confront, or it's the community that they live in. There's a lot of reasons that people don't confront it, and we need you to. I mean, for those of us who experience this stuff, we need the help of white people. I mean, we need you to step up, and we need you to be more responsible in terms of how you deal with your observation. Because the reality is, by the time we actually experience racism, it's probably been it's been festering quite a long time within the white community. So there's an opportunity even at very young ages, for people to confront some of the stuff. And hey, it's one thing to not like somebody. It's another thing to not like somebody specifically because of the color of their skin, or to feel that you are superior to somebody else and that you need to assert power over other people just by virtue of your perceived race. So that's what I want to throw out there. All right, let me give the number out. The number is 212-209-2877. That's the number to call to be a part of the show. And look, we can talk about it. Give us some feedback on the show. Even if your feedback is negative, it gives us something to talk about. So give us some feedback about the station, whatever you want to talk about. But that's the number to call, 212-209-2877. That's the number to call to be a part of Let's Talk this week. Hey, the other thing I want to mention, I did fix the problem we had last week with not being able to stream on Facebook. It turns out they said my access to Facebook had expired, and I had to renew it, which is something I've never heard. Well, as it relates to using the camera that we use. So
you know way more about this
yeah.
than
So
I do.
it was. It took. I had to get help. A buddy of mine back home actually helped find the spot and the permissions that I had to give. So we're good to go. So we are streaming live on Facebook, and of course we do take this show, we put it into a podcast, and we put the video of the show on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. The podcasts are Let's Talk Native with John Kane, and you can find any of your the popular podcast platforms you can go to, and if you just search Let's Talk Native with John Kane, the latest show will come up, and you can dial back. So I encourage you to subscribe both to our podcast and to our YouTube channel, because you'll get a chance to see not only this show but the show that I do back from Seneca Territory, which is called Let's Talk Native, and there's a lot to be gained from the conversation, and there's probably some uncomfortable truths that you'll experience as well. So that's just the reality. All right, so let's get right into it. Let's go right to the callers. Caller, you're up first. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Casey from Monmouth County, New Jersey.
All right, good to hear from you. Nice to thank you for calling and be a part of the show.
Cool, thanks. Totally off subject of what you're talking about, but I've been wanting to give you a call and ask this question for some time. I listen to you guys all the time. I'm totally ignorant about it, but my question is, what sort of contact did indigenous populations from South America through Central America up into North America have pre-colonialism?
Pre-contact?
Were there
Contact with
were
who?
Native tribes in North America aware of the Aztecs and the Inca Empire in the South? Just out of curiosity, I don't really know the answers to that.
Well, one of the answers to that question, is can be directly associated with something like corn. I mean, because corn was traded so broadly across, even down into South America, and this is a species. I mean, corn is not a naturally existing food. It actually required the hand of man. If you ever planted a field of corn and then didn't harvest it or whatever else, the next year you would not get a field of corn. You get a field with a few stalks that might grow, but it actually takes the hand of man to open up the corn husks, remove the seed, and replant them. So it's been essentially genetically modified through the hand of man. not in a lab, but through the hand of man over. And it also has been, it's changed by location. So corn is one of is part of the proof that there was a significant amount of trade and commerce that existed between native peoples over vast periods of time. Look, there was you mentioned this, and I just posted a video on my Facebook page about a guy. His last name is Hancock. I think Graham Hancock, I think his name is. He's from the UK, and he's got a book called America Older. And what he's talking about is the fact that anthropologists and archaeologists have refused to accept that how long there's been a population in the Western Hemisphere, and, because of the Bering Strait theory and all this other stuff that they've promoted even to little kids in school for years and years. They've assumed that there was only been people, human beings in the Western Hemisphere for 13,000 years, and then they find archaeological evidence that says, well, it must be longer than that. So they may have pushed that envelope to 30,000, but this Hancock gentleman is suggesting that it's 130,000 years. So what he's saying is that that there's 100,000 years of human existence and human development in this Western Hemisphere that most people have categorically denied for the most part, but there's increasing evidence that is so, and so when you think about that, you realize that there's been a huge amount of interaction over large expanses of space and time during that 100,000 years.
So I also want to add that, like, in terms of land and structures, like, we never created lines, so there wasn't like a South America versus North America. It was just a big land mass, the continent rather. And you can also see that through the tobacco, the line of tobacco trade. And because I did do an archaeological study on Cayuga territory, we proved by the soil carbon date in the artifacts that we saw that indigenous people have been on the land since the late 1300s, so to use in like land rights claims. And so we found like decorated pottery, decorated peace pipe, and then obviously animal bone. And not that I found, but I was told by an elder in the Cayuga Nation that one of the peace pipes had a parrot carved into it. So obviously parrots are not from North America, so that is in itself the documentation of the traveling between North and South indigenous people. So yeah, we definitely know each other.
Well, and there was clearly advanced, and I gotta be careful with this. There were clearly civilizations that developed technologically. Even we could argue whether they was the evolution of civilization or the de-evolution of civilization, because some of this technology sometimes doesn't bode well. I mean, and you can look at things like what science develops that seems to do more to kill people than save people. But there's clearly signs, not just of pyramids in Chichen Itza and I'm messing up my. Piku,
Machu
Picchu, sorry, but there's evidence of ruins that are still being discovered every day in South America and in North America, and even up in the Canadian region. So the amount of trade that would take place over, I mean, if we were only here for 13,000 years, like like people tried to say, it would be hard to really wrap your head around how a population could build up on a continent over such a short period of time, because by many estimates there were over 130 to 200 million people living in the Western Hemisphere when Columbus made his voyage, and for that to have all come from a land bridge across the Bering Strait only 13,000 years ago is obviously absurd. But I thank you for the call. We have stories to talk about the eagle and the condor and that kind of stuff that go into our into these legendary stories. So we talk a lot about the relationship that we've had with native peoples in from faraway places. And Shawnee's exactly right. Some of the illustrations and some of the things that we see where we we could see that there were feathers and images that we captured from areas that were not indigenous to our own people, have shown themselves over and over again.
Yeah, not addressing the travel route, but addressing how long we've been inhabiting the space is relevant reflected in songs and stories about the position of moon. And when you study, I guess, astrology, then you can see that our stories are dictating the weather patterns that have happened for so long in this region and area.
And there's always this real effort to try to put a specific date, a calendar date. And when we always talk about things like since time immemorial, we know that we're going back farther than 1,000 years or 2,000 years. I mean, I even hear people, suggest that the Haudenosaunee, our cultures are 1,000 years old as opposed to tens of thousands of years old. Which, to me, that coincides with the belief that because of talk of lunar eclipses and stuff like that people think they can put a specific date to it, but that's not the way we tell stories. And so our oral history is not based on putting a carbon date on something or a calendar date on something. It's really based on associating a lifestyle that we had during different periods of our development. So, but anyway, thanks for the call. All right, we'll go to another caller. Caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, John, this is Jeff from Union County, New Jersey.
Hey,
Hi,
Jeff,
Johnny.
thanks for calling.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, it's my pleasure. I tell you, the first thing I want to say is your show last week was off the chain. It was really, I tried to call in, but it was just too spirited. I couldn't get through. The other thing, one thing I'd like to say, too, I'd like to apologize for some of the rude callers that have been, ragging on you the last couple of weeks. I don't know what's in people's minds anymore.
Yeah, I don't know, it's every day.
I was listening to a show yesterday on BAI, and they were talking about how, it was the positive mind, and a woman, I think she called herself Sky, she called in and she said they were talking about seasons, and she was metaphorically talking about how cold it's getting in America. And I'm thinking that even if the spring coming, the climate in itself is cold. It's kind of like back in the 70s, there was a guy, Gil Scott-Heron, and he had an album, Winter in America. And he wasn't talking about the season. He was talking about the mindset.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the unfortunate part, because some people listen,
even though it's getting warmer.
Yeah, some people who listen aren't really listening. They can only listen at a surface level.
Exactly. There was a show I forget I used to listen to years ago, and just about without fail, every week some guy would call in and he'd say, "Go back to Cuba, you commies."
Yeah.
And it was just ridiculous. It had nothing to do with the topic. It had nothing constructive to add. But anyway, I don't want to get too off topic because if there ever was a show that deserved at least 2 hours, it's yours.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank
you.
you.
No, I mean that sincerely. Your show is really great. But anyway, not to waste any more time, what I did want to ask you, I came to know about you because I always listened to T. Okerson when he used to be on Thursday morning, First Voices. And then when you took over when he was on sabbatical, that's how I came to know. And then I followed you as you got your own show, as rightly you should. Anyway, around the holidays, every year, T. Okerson used to have a commercial that he used to play, and it actually used to choke me up and bring me to tears, quite frankly, where he would say, if you're thinking about getting that new electric gadget for winter, think about the kids here that don't have jackets and don't have shoes and this, that, and the other. And I wanted to tie that in with what you always talk about with the gaming revenues, because I'm sitting here and I'm saying to myself, if you're talking about owing billions to somebody, then you must be making more billions. Where's the money going and who's in charge of it?
Well, I mean, one thing you have to realize is that places like Seneca Nation, they don't have any other sources of revenue other than what their gaming enterprises are. And what I will say that in that period of time where the state was getting $1.5 billion, the assumption is, well, then the Senecas must have gotten way more than that. Well, they actually didn't get way more than that. When I said that they were paying 25% of the net slot drop to the state, let me explain what net slot drop is. Net slot drop is the money that goes into a slot machine minus the payouts. So out of the 75% that the Senecas keep, or the Seneca Gaming keeps, they have to pay everything. They pay all the overhead, all the electric, the utilities, for the machines, for the salaries, the waitresses, the slot attendants, all that. So when you do the math, it's almost 50%. So it's probably closer to 48% of the slot revenue, actual real slot revenue, when you take out all the costs. The state was getting for an exclusivity that they weren't even really providing. So, and again, I'm not saying that if the Senecas kept $2 billion, that's not a lot of money, but it's over a 14-year period, and they fund everything out of that. So they give a certain percentage back to their people. They get a it used to be a quarterly, and now it's a monthly stipend, if you will, which is based on essentially leasing the land to the Seneca Gaming Corporation. So they get a monthly check, and it's not a lot. It's a couple $1,000s, I think. I don't even know. I'm not Seneca, but
That's it?
You're talking about 7,000 people getting getting a couple $1,000s a month. So you do the math.
It's kind of like the Alaskan oil revenue.
Well, yeah. So, but it's not a lot of money. But then every program, every building that's built in the Seneca Nation, and they've got an elaborate system of everything from recreational centers to a health center, clinic, dentistry.
But it's also
optical.
like roads and like public spaces, like publicly funded things.
They have an elder center. I mean, so
Yeah.
everything that they have a court system. Everything gets funded from that revenue. So when people say, "Well, the Seneca's got all that money," I mean, but you're funding an entire nation. It may be small, but you're still funding an entire nation with that money. So the assumption that everybody says, "Wow, good, let the Senecas pay. They're making all that money," and that's what I hear in some of the voices. As I do some of these shows on this topic, but they're not realizing that what the state is fleecing from these guys, they're getting for essentially no value. So that's the point, I guess.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. Well, and thanks for the question, because it's a valid question. People ask, because people automatically want to say, well, it must be tied to corruption. They must be, there's probably only a few people making the money. Look, there are some high-paying jobs at the Seneca Nation. There's no question about it. But there's also, a pretty good level of employment that comes out of these. I mean, I think the Seneca Nation is one of the largest employers in Western New York. So all of those salaries are paid out of that gaming revenue. So
it's also just like relevant, but kind of separately. The idea that the state is saying, you indigenous people who we, moved you around,
diminish your land population, your resources.
Yeah. You have to pay us is absolutely absurd. So colonizers came and destroyed everything. And now you guys have built all of this yourself from the ground up. And now once you're at the peak, or you're starting to see success and you're starting to reestablish your community and create programming to teach language, to keep elders safe, to keep kids safe, to get back on track, now we are going to demand that you need to give us 50% or whatever of that. Like, perfect timing that is, that you need that. And it's absurd to hear it out loud. That
and it's done under the threat. I mean, it's not under a threat, because the threat that is never really spoken is, if you don't pay us, we won't renew our gaming compact with you. And since the underlying federal law says that a Class 3 gaming requires, for it to start up, needs a gaming compact, there's an assumption made that I think is an improper assumption, that if the state walks away from the gaming compact, that the casinos have to close. And I maintain all along, and I think the Senecas have to stand up to this, is that the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act never intended to give the states that level of power. And so
okay, but then also the attitude that if the compact doesn't move forward, then what did, like, for example, the mayor of Niagara Falls, what did he say about, well, if you don't give us the money, then we're not going to send ambulance, EMT, police officers onto the driveway. So he's like, whatever, said you can gamble with your money, but you're also gambling with your life. And that attitude, which is so common upstate, and like you said, also surrounding all these indigenous areas, is like, well, if you don't give us your money, then we're just not going to help anybody.
We'll let you die. We'll let you die. So that's essentially,
which is not an unknown attitude.
Yeah. Hey, we'll take a break here. I'm going to play a little bit of another. That was Logan Stats that we opened up with. That was Simple Man from his Goodbye Goldie album, and we'll play another track cut from that, and then we'll come back with more of your calls. Again, the number is 212-209-2877. 212-209-2877.
Sixth Street, my new suit, my acoustic guitar, counting the cracks in the sidewalk till I reach my favorite bar. Familiar faces, familiar places, familiar graces. Familiar faces, familiar places, familiar graces. What they say, graces. Took a walk down Wall Street where the billionaires smoke Cuban cigars, counting the souls in the sidewalk. No one knows who they are. Shattered faces, shattered places, shattered graces. Shattered faces, shattered places, shattered graces. What they say, graces. Whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, oh, oh. I'm broken on my bills, I'm spanning on my chain, I've done out the cheap thrills, I do it all again. I'm broken on my bills, spent on my chain, and done out the cheap thrill, and do it all again, again.
All right, just want to catch your breath a little bit. That's more Logan Stats. He's a musician, he's Mohawk from Six Nations, and won a couple of awards with a couple of the Indigenous Awards associations, including the Native American Music Awards. But he also won a competition on the Canadian side, CBC, and it was called the Launch, I think, or something like that. So he won a recording contract by performing. It's a little bit like one of these talent shows that you see in the United States. But so anyway, that's Logan Stats. Look for his stuff. This CD is called Goodbye Goldie. You can find it online, and by all means check it out. All right, let's get right back into it. Caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, it's Donna from Langhorne.
That's one of my
Donna.
favorite people from Langhorne. How are you doing?
Good. I just wanted to go back to that idiot from last week that, was talking about the
Kill Whitey shows.
Kill Whitey, thing, and how, all right, that guy is just totally ignorant. He was just coming on there just to say
He's a troll, as they say. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. But the problem is that even in places where it's supposed to be safe, like I went and spoke at a youth and justice and peace conference at my old school, which was Council Rock Indians, and I was asked to speak at these things before, but only enough to acknowledge the Native people of the area and whose land, these schools are on. And I thought, what, this year, since it was going to be at Council Rock Indians, my old school, that I felt, it would be a good thing for me to speak about the mascot issue. And nobody knew that I was going to do it, and I took longer amount of time because I figured they can't just kick me off the stage. And I, prepared a whole speech about how harmful it is and how I felt and everything. And the feeling I got afterwards was like people they weren't happy about what I did.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what better place? Because this is about how teenagers feel and racism that they faced and everything. So as my teenage self, what I faced in the 70s, but it's like they just don't take it seriously. They didn't discuss it. There was no more mention of it. It was like, and even in the newspaper when they did the article about it, they didn't mention it. So, we have trolls who have this insecurity about that, their entitlement is being threatened. But even in these safe spaces, we just don't get the recognition.
Well, and the point that I was making last week, I was talking about the fact that one of these stalwarts of the evangelical right, Pat Buchanan, had wrote an article that appeared in a fairly local paper to where I live, Jamestown, New York, which is not far from the Allegheny Territory or the Cattaraugus Territory where I live. And what he was questioning was whether, is genocide really a bad thing? Aren't there some cultures that deserve to be obliterated and wiped off the face of the earth? And, and so this whole idea of trying to normalize this idea that there is such a thing as not just superior peoples, but superior cultures, and that with that superiority leaves the right to destroy a culture you deem unworthy of existence. And so when you look at somebody like Pat Buchanan or the current sitting president or the Kill Whitey dude who calls up on occasion, I mean, these guys are trying to enter their voice to normalize it. And in a way, look, if you're going to bring it up, I'm going to speak out against it. And so that's part of the whole point. And I think it is incumbent on those of us who are willing to engage these conversations to take on all callers. So I don't mind getting a troll that calls in, because look, it gives me an opportunity to confront their racism directly, even on the air. So I don't mind so much.
Yeah, I was shocked at that at the conference that I went through that so many people could recognize harm towards other minorities, but they just don't want to recognize, or address the harm to Native people.
Well, and again, there's hypocrisy all over the place, and it's like I always say, there's a unique level of racism that Native people experience, because on one hand, there's a certain affinity that Americans have for what they think a Native person is in the past, and yet along with that affinity comes a dismissing of us as we exist currently and as we exist today, and it's more than just a dismissal. It is it's almost a rejection that we have a right to have a voice, and that's one of the things I got to say. I mean, WBAI provides folks like myself and Teokusin the opportunity to engage some of these conversations that, frankly, there aren't a whole lot of venues that give us this. I mean, I may show up on a show here and there or get a speaking engagement here and there, but I get a chance to come on here every week with Shawnee and confront some of these issues or educate. And for those people who think that I'm just an angry Native person and that I hate white people, I don't hate white people. In fact, the fact is I need white people to step up. I mean, we all do, and part of the reason for trying to educate people is to prevent this normalization of racism, because that's what has existed for hundreds of years. It was normalized, and it's only been in the last 100 years that there's been even a conversation that says, it is wrong to denationalize people or to commit genocide against people. Because before it was accepted that if you were in a position to assert control and power, that you had not only a right but almost an obligation to do so. But we began to think differently about that over the last 100 years. But I'll tell you, change is slow, and we still have a whole lot of people that harbor this right or this privilege, or in some case, the fear of it slipping away. And that's what I saw. That's what I say about the caller last week. Is that's a guy who lives in fear that his white privilege is slipping away, and that's why he can equate even a conversation about racism with a conversation about killing whitey.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much, and I don't want to take up the rest of your time.
All right, we'll grab another caller or two. Thanks for calling.
Also, I just wanted to mention to Donna, even though it's not Women's History Month anymore, I just wanted to applaud you for going into a room full of people and talking about a subject that you knew would be touchy to them, and you did it anyway. And like, Indigenous women are always leading all of these things and doing all of the movements that we have to do, and we're the ones that are doing the work, the hard work, whether it's working with our own direct family and communities to heal, or in a public eye, in a public sense. And you speaking up about the mascot issue and taking that risk is really bold and really brave. And that's what, circling back to what you were saying about white folks who know racism is wrong but don't have that courage to stick up to talk about it. That's the whole problem. And that's unfortunately what women or people of color also have to do all the time. We have to have the extra tough skin, have more energy to do all of this work, and we don't have a choice not to speak up about it. That's the thing with white privilege, is like, you don't have to. You can tune into what's going on with everybody else, or you can take a back seat because it's too heavy, and that's where the privilege lies. And I just really want to thank you for doing that, because I know all of this work goes unthanked and unnoticed.
Yep. All right, let me go. We got time for one more caller before we got to get out of here, so let's do that. Caller, you're up next. You're up last. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hello?
Yep.
Oh, John, Dennis from Staten Island.
Hey, Dennis, how you doing?
Okay. I just want to let you know about, pre-European in New York State. There's a book that I got as a premium many, many years ago that I've just been reading over the last 2 years. I don't get a chance to read that much. But it's about, the Native in New York State.
Oh, is it
in New
Pritchard?
York
Is it
City.
Pritchard's book?
Yeah.
Pritchard.
Yeah. I've had him on my show before. Yeah, it's good stuff.
And I came across the Haudenosaunee, and of course I thought of you, and I really would like to know, as a listener and a BAI supporter and a supporter of whatever, your community where you come from, is it a strong traditional community? Is there a strong tradition? Can you tell us something about what it's like, living your other life besides the BAI life?
Well, people, again, they get a foregone conclusion on what traditional means, but I think there are people who still live with many of our what I would call, I guess, traditional principles, and there aren't a whole lot of communities that govern in what people perceive as a traditional manner. There's a few communities that claim to have government longhouses, but they still, unfortunately, governance has really been assimilated, but it doesn't mean that the people have. And in fact, there's so much of our culture, our rich culture, that is maintained. Everything from the arts to the language to ceremonies. Every community still do most of the ceremonies, our traditional ceremonies that are usually seasonal Thanksgivings. We all do those things. Most of them have some elements of a cultural program. So it exists in every one of our towns. My family's from Ganawage, which is on the Canadian side. My wife is Oneida from what would be considered central New York, and we live on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. And in every one of these communities, there are people who really embody a native identity. And I'm not saying that there aren't assimilated people within those communities, and there aren't assimilated systems within those communities. But there's a real live element to what is our identity. And it's where I get back to one of the things, and Shawnee and I talked about this the other day. One of the problems that I have with words like indigenous or even aboriginal is not that the textbook definition or the Webster's definition of the word is wrong, but the way it's been used internationally, especially in things like treaties or even the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it's the definition that they use is that we are descendants of an original people, not that we are still those people. And I argue that that's wrong, that we aren't descendants of survivors of genocide. We are current survivors of genocide. We are those people. We aren't just merely descendants of. Now there are people who merely have native ancestry that could call themselves descendants, I guess, of indigenous peoples by some percentage. Usually, they'll tell you that they're 1/16 Cherokee or something like that. Yeah, those people are not native people, but they may have ancestry. Elizabeth Warren comes to mind, I guess. I think the idea of labeling a person as indigenous and meaning that they are merely descendants of an original people is a mistake. And so that's why if I'm going to use the word indigenous, I feel like I always got to qualify it so people understand that I'm not referring to us as descendants.
And I also,
right, but you find an identity. I mean, your community has an identity amongst themselves or individuals of what it is.
Well, and there's a movement. I mean, I think we're reclaiming more of that. I mean, so that's something that I think is real clear.
And I also want to add, so I never grew up on territory by any stretch of the means, but there is a massive amount of reclaiming, like you're saying, specifically by young people, specifically by young women, or specifically by Two-Spirit. And that is vastly different nation for nation. So, for example, the Haudenosaunee or the Iroquois is a confederacy, and so there's a linkage, but even between every nation, there's differences in that. So one person can't describe what it's like on all of it, but there's a massive amount to reclaim language. There's a massive amount to reclaim traditional wear, traditional pastime, like basket weaving, or how to cook traditionally, or how to grow food.
Gather medicines.
And
food,
also, there's so much that's available to public, like nation per nation, like whether it's a powwow or whether it's just like come and learn how to, like, what our winter games are.
We do a lot
of
gatherings, yeah.
There's, and you can find that here in New York, in the city, or on the border of New Jersey, or in Delaware, or if you're upstate on any territory like that, or in Canada. There's massive amounts to not only reclaim for the South, but also to educate the nearby folks, because the cities would take our names and put them as street signs or geographic locations, but people don't even they'll know, people who live there know the street name, but they don't know where it comes from, and that's really problematic. If you ask any kid who grew up in upstate New York, whose territory are you on? What is Mohawk? Where did that come from? Like, they don't know. They literally have no idea. And that's a choice not to know.
Pritchard's book does a good job with that too.
Yes, it's beautiful. I loved it. I'm not.
All right, we got to wrap it up
Thank
here.
you.
So I want to thank you and thank you for your comments, Shawnee, as well. I want to thank you for calling and being a part of the show. We'll get back to our regular schedule after probably we're going to do a show next week and the following week. Then we'll be in Fun Drive, and we'll look forward to getting back to our regular schedule after that. But bear with us and join us each week. This is John Kane with Shawnee Rice. This is Let's Talk.
And where it goes, best love I've ever known.